So I don't understand if they can use the principle or the interest where they can't use the principle. But aside from that, their view when I talked to them was they can use the interest for a long, long time. It's fine. It sits there forever. It's fine.
And now the EU,
whatever the solution, I'm all in.
So the EU's done that. But to your point, Senator, I think there are other possibilities that we're driving toward, including looking at ways to collateralize the principle.
Yeah.
And to use that as the basis for a loan, for a bond that would generate a lot more resources for Ukraine up front.
Very good. My time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here before this committee. Thank you for your continued willingness to be in an open dialogue with the Senate and Senate Foreign Relations Committee on these important matters. Press reports suggest that the United States and Saudi Arabia are close to finalizing the bilateral elements of a regional security deal. The Saudis themselves called the existing draft semi-final. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the status of these talks to the extent that you can tell us. The first is this: it seems as if the administration has really put their foot on the accelerator to try to get the U.S.-Saudi elements of this agreement wrapped up. But our committee's understanding has always been that this would be in the context of an agreement that included Israel, and critically would include real commitments for a Palestinian state. Unfortunately and regrettably, right now, there's not seemed to be the willingness or the room inside the Israeli politic to make those commitments. And so my first question is, why the rush to get a deal done with Saudi Arabia when we don't even know the shape of the commitments that Israel may ever be willing to make? And two, why do we have confidence that Saudi Arabia would ever live up to the commitments that it is making? In the national security world, a mutual defense or a security treaty is a sacred trust. This is a country that 4 years ago chopped to pieces an American resident journalist. This is a country that 2 years ago turned its back on us when we asked them to side with us at OPEC Plus and instead chose Russia. And so I'd ask you to answer those two questions. Why the rush, given that we don't really understand the potential for the full agreement to come into effect? And what gives you confidence that Saudi Arabia will live up to any of the commitments it's making?
Thank you, Senator. A few things here. First, yes, we have sought to move forward in negotiating the bilateral U.S.-Saudi aspects of a normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But even if we were to conclude those agreements, and I believe we actually can conclude them relatively quickly, given all the work that's been done, they could not go forward, and the overall package could not go forward, absent other things that have to happen for normalization to proceed. And in particular, the Saudis have been very clear that would require calm in Gaza, and it would require a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. And it may well be, as you said, that in this moment, Israel is not able or willing to proceed down that pathway. But to the extent that the agreements are finalized in principle between the United States and Saudi Arabia, that in effect calls the question. And Israel will have to decide whether it wants to proceed and take advantage of the opportunity to achieve something that it has sought from its founding, which is normal relations with the countries in its region. And we see the possibilities for the future in that agreement. We saw them starkly, powerfully, on April 13th and April 14th, when Iran engaged in an unprecedented attack, and a direct attack by Iran in Israel. And countries come together, led by the United States, to defend Israel from that attack and defend it very successfully. There's an opportunity for Israel to become integrated in the region, to get the security, fundamental security it needs and wants, to have the relationships that it sought going back to its founding. But in order for that to actually go forward, there has to be an end to Gaza. There has to be a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. So I think one advantage of completing the work, at least in principle, with the Saudis, is that the question then becomes one that's no longer theoretical or hypothetical, but one that needs to be answered. And we'll see what the answer is. Look, these agreements, like any agreements, whether it's with Saudi Arabia or anyone else, you count on the other party to live up to the agreement, and if they don't, there are consequences, including the agreements being, in effect, abrogated. So I think it's profoundly in Saudi Arabia's interests to fulfill the commitments that they would make in the context of these agreements. And by the way, none of this will go forward before Congress has its say.
Let me just express worry at the phrase credible pathway to a Palestinian state, right? A credible pathway to a Palestinian state is very different than a Palestinian state. We have had numerous credible pathways to Palestinian states that neither side has made real upon. This is a unique and perhaps final opportunity to actually cement a Palestinian state, which many of us believe is the necessary predicate to peace in the region and the long-term survival of a Jewish state in the Middle East. Look forward to continued conversations about this really important topic. Wanted to touch one other subject with you. You've got $169 million in this request to counter fentanyl and other synthetic drug production around the world. Thank you for that commitment. Later this week, the Senate is going to vote on a bipartisan border security measure negotiated with Republicans that would dedicate $20 billion to border security, including substantial, unprecedented new resources to stop fentanyl from coming into the country. This amount that you've requested, the underlying budget, stands on top of the commitments that you secured at the recent summit in San Francisco from the Chinese to do some really important, dramatic things to stop the movement of precursor into Mexico and into the United States. Just in the remaining 30 seconds to a minute, the importance of the achievement at the summit and how that dovetails with the requests that you're making. You've made substantial progress on stopping the flow of fentanyl into the United States. You're to be commended for that, but this money seems critical.
First of all, I commend the efforts being made here to dedicate these resources to what is arguably the #1 challenge we face in terms of public health and in terms of the security of the American people. #1 killer of Americans aged 18 to 49, not heart attacks, not car accidents, not guns, fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. So this has to be, and it is for us, a #1 priority. It requires a lot of work at home. It also requires a lot of work around the world, given the global nature of the threat. With regard to China, President Biden achieved important agreements with President Xi when they met at the end of last year outside of San Francisco. And China moved ahead in publishing new regulations, in cracking down on some of the companies that were engaged in producing and then transferring the precursors, the ingredients that go into making fentanyl, as well as to establishing a working group with us so that we could track this. Now, when I was just there a few weeks ago, I made the case that while this was a good start and important, more needs to happen in order for it to be truly effective in reducing the flows that are coming to Mexico, the precursors, and then synthesized into fentanyl and coming into the United States, including very public enforcements of the law with prosecutions and convictions, including scheduling some precursors that China has agreed to schedule but has not yet done to make it their use more restrictive, and also going at the financial networks where we've seen connections between some Chinese entities and criminal cartels in our own hemisphere, and working from their end to sever those. So we'll be watching to see whether that happens. It's a start, but a lot more needs to happen.
Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you and appreciate the extraordinary commitment that you have made over the last years to continue to foster American interests around the world. I'm sure we don't agree on all the topics, but your devotion to American interests is noteworthy and certainly something that I applaud. You know I'm going to want to talk about China. China is a disappointment for those of us who followed the Second World War and then followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. We're hoping that China would align with us in some way and see more modernization and liberalization and democracy. Unfortunately, it's taken a different turn. Its ambition is to lead the world, dominate the world militarily, economically, geopolitically. I just, on a piece of paper while we were here, I just wrote down some of the tactics that I see that they're employing in their grand strategy in no particular order. Monopolizing key industries, with TikTok being able to gather information about Americans, Confucius Institutes to be able to promote their policies in our campuses, inserting themselves through cyber systems in our critical infrastructure, buying ports around the world so that they can foster their naval commitments or naval ambition, putting in place graduate students in our universities, particularly in STEM subjects, to be able to steal technology, the 1,000 Scholars Program to do the same, inserting themselves into leadership positions in international organizations, purchasing farmland around our military installations, selling drones, Chinese drones to our police forces, spy cranes in the seaport we heard about more recently, monopolizing key raw materials around the world, stealing technology from our companies, spreading dissension in the U.S. and through the West. I mean, it's an extraordinary list, and it goes on and on and on. That is why the former chairman and I of this committee proposed and actually got signed into law a commitment to put together a group of people, Republican, Democrat, inside government, outside government, to develop a comprehensive strategy to deal with China's ambition. Part of this legislation said that by last July, the administration would be required to submit to Congress in a classified form and with an unclassified summary the results of this strategic development. Now, I've been offered the chance to review in camera what has been prepared. I've tried to schedule that, and that has not been responded to by the department. But does the State Department intend to submit to the law as signed by the President to actually put in place and to submit to Congress the strategy in a classified form?
Senator, first of all, I agree wholeheartedly with the short litany of items that you listed in terms of what China is doing to try to pursue its military, economic, diplomatic preeminence or dominance in the world. And across the board, we have worked in new and effective ways to deal with that, to push back against that. And I just say very quickly before coming to your question, two fundamental things have changed in our approach to China that allows us to approach it from a position of strength. One, what's happened here at home, the investments that we've made in ourselves with the leadership of Congress, particularly when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to the CHIPS and Science Act, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act. In each of these ways, we put ourselves in a position to make sure that we are leading when it comes to the industries of the future. And what I see around the world is people taking note of those investments and wanting to partner with us. Second, we have aligned in ways that we have not before with key partners in Europe, in Asia, and beyond in the approach to China. And you see that now in convergence of the approach, the tools that we're using, both individually and collectively, whether it's investment screening mechanisms, whether it's controls on outbound investment to make sure that it's not going to help industries in China that could come back and hurt us, export controls that we're doing in a much more coordinated way, working across the board to deal with some of the economic non-market practices that China engages in that unfairly penalize not only our workers and companies, but workers and companies around the world. I can go on down the list, but we see that convergence in very powerful ways. Now, on the strategy and advisory board, first, we applaud everything that you've done and your leadership on this for many years. We announced the public strategy back in the spring of 22, and you were very gracious in actually being there when I put that out. But yes, the NSC, I know, and this is what the White House has made available, the classified strategy for in-camera review. I'm going to make sure if there's some problem in scheduling that happens. And I'll also go back to them about what more we can do. I know we've provided classified briefings to members and to staff on the approach that's in the strategy. But let me come back to you on making sure that you can see and other members can see the full strategy in the classified setting.
Well, the law that was passed called not just for a classified setting, which is certainly appropriate, but also to submit to Congress in a public setting what the summary of those strategic moves would be. And as I went through that long list of Chinese steps, those are the kinds of things I'm looking for. To say, look, our strategy is invest and align and compete sounds great. That may be an objective, but the tactical steps of what we're going to do country by country, industry by industry, port by port, spyware by spyware, et cetera, that's the kind of detail that really creates a comprehensive strategy that can be effective. And I guess I'm concerned that as we go potentially from one administration to the next, whether that's in 1 year or in 5 years, that we have a strategy that lasts. Following the Second World War, George Kennan and others came together to develop a strategy that was very successful in confronting the Soviet Union. We're looking to do the same thing here, but we haven't seen anything of that nature yet. And in the law required that be submitted to Congress in a public setting, but also in a classified setting. And I would ask that you honor that commitment made in law and provide that information both to Congress and to those of us that would want to attend a classified setting.
Thank you, and I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I applaud your and the President's efforts to condemn Hamas's invasion on October 7th, to secure a ceasefire, and to secure the release of hostages. President Biden has also recognized, however, that the campaign carried out by the Netanyahu government in Gaza has included what the President's called indiscriminate bombing, resulted in a massive number of civilian casualties. The NSM 20 report concluded, and I quote, "Given Israel's significant reliance on U.S.-made defense articles, it's reasonable to assess that Israel has used U.S.-provided weapons in instances inconsistent with international humanitarian law." Given this assessment, why did the State Department conclude that Israel's assurances that it was not using weapons in a manner inconsistent with international law are in fact credible and reliable?
Thank you, Senator. We've said two things from day one since October 7th. One, that Israel not only has the right, it has the obligation to defend itself and to try to make sure that October 7th never happens again. And the United States is committed to doing everything we can to support it in those efforts. We've also said that the way Israel does it matters, particularly with regard to civilian protection in Gaza and the provision of humanitarian assistance to Gazans who need it. And we have been working every single day since then, not only to provide Israel with what it needs, but also to do our best to help see that Palestinians get what they need in Gaza. And we see the horrific suffering of children, women, and men who've been caught in a crossfire of Hamas's making for 8 months now. And we are working every day to try to alleviate that. When it comes to the NSM and the use of our weapons, here's what the report said. It said exactly as you quoted. Given the totality of the damage that's been done, and given the fact that we are a major provider of weapons to Israel, it is reasonable to assess that in some instances, Israel has acted in ways that are not consistent with international humanitarian law. And indeed, we are investigating a number of instances, some of which are alluded to in the report, others that are not, to make those determinations. Israel itself is investigating hundreds of incidents to make its own determinations. And indeed, there are criminal investigations underway in Israel in this area. It's very difficult to make final determinations in the midst of a war, when we do not have access on the ground, and when you have a almost totally unique battlefield where an enemy, a terrorist organization, Hamas, is hiding behind and underneath civilians in apartment buildings, in mosques, in schools, and firing at the Israeli forces. So we're determined to make every appropriate determination. We're determined that there be no double standard. We have processes at the State Department, including our conventional arms transfer policy, including our
thank you for your
process that we're
explanation.
engaged in.
I know that it's so complicated that you could go on for a while, but I think you've pointed out the challenge and the fact that assessments are ongoing. I do feel it's important that we approach these questions in NSM 20 with as much integrity as possible. On May 7th, President Biden announced his decision to pause the shipment of the 502,000 bombs. And the following day, he drew a red line stating that, quote, if Israel goes into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities. And you, Mr. Secretary, reinforced this point when you said, if Israel launches a major military operation into Rafah, then there are systems we're not going to be supporting and supplying for that operation. We are already seeing significant action in Rafah. About 1 million people have fled the city. Is the president going to stand by his red line?
First, the president stands behind the proposition that we will always make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. No one has done more, not only throughout his career, but over the last 8 or so months to make sure that that's the case, and that will continue. At the same time, when it comes to Rafah, we've been very clear in many conversations with Israeli leadership over the past months about our deep concerns about a major military operation in Rafah and the impact that that would have on civilians in Gaza. We insisted that if anything is to go forward, we see a clear, credible plan to get civilians out of harm's way, but not only to get them out of harm's way, to make sure that they're provided for when they're out of harm's way. Now, you mentioned we've seen a very large exodus of people from Rafah, but they are now in places where they don't have the support that they need and that we believe is critical to provide. We also remain very concerned about any major military operation and the impact it would have on the remaining population, given the dense urban environment in Rafah and what we've seen in other places. And so the president's been clear about this with Israel, in public as well as in conversations with others, about the fact that we will not support a major military operation.
Thank you, and that's helpful to understand. I wanted to turn to the issue of providing aid in the situation of the challenge of food and water and medical supplies and so forth. The NSM 20 report noted that action and inaction by Israel contributed significantly to a lack of sustained and predictable delivery of needed assistance at scale, and that the level reaching Palestinian civilians remains insufficient. Insufficient is a very polite way, given that we now have what Cindy McCain has described as full-blown famine in the north, and we're all very aware of the highly stressed conditions in the south as well. As a result of the restrictions that Israel has had in place, we have been urging them, you all have been urging them, and I applaud that, to open more gates, to have a more systematic inspection process so far more trucks per day can get in, to make sure that once the trucks are through the gate, that they can actually get to the warehouses without being attacked or so forth. You've also supported air deliveries by ourselves and by other nations. You've also built a dock. All these things are in response to the restriction of aid. And thus, I was somewhat puzzled that the report concludes we do not assess that the Israeli government is prohibiting or otherwise restricting the transport and delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance, because it seems like all those actions we're taking, the urging of Israel to do more, and all the other air delivery and docks and so forth, are all a response to the restrictions preventing sufficient aid to get in and creating famine conditions affecting a couple million people.
If you could respond briefly.
Yes. First, Senator, there is no doubt that the people of Gaza, children, women, men, are experiencing an acute humanitarian crisis. And food, water, medicine, shelter, all of these things are in severe short supply. And we've been working every single day as well since October 7th to try to make sure that they could get what they need. And we have impressed upon Israel time and again the imperative of really bringing a determined focus to this, not making it an afterthought in the conduct of the war against Hamas, but an absolute priority. They've taken steps over these many months to open access points, going back to October, to have aid go in, but it has not been sufficient by far to meet the need. We saw much more significant progress over the last month or 6 weeks, particularly in the wake of a phone call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu in early April, where we saw more access points opening. We saw a land route from Jordan being activated. We saw openings in the north, which was critical because aid to North Gaza was particularly deficient. That's improved. But now we've seen, unfortunately, the reverse. Because of the actions in and around Rafah, we see the critical transit points in the south, Rafah Gate itself, as well as Kerem Shalom, until recently being stopped or disrupted, so that the situation in the south now risks being even more egregious. But the restrictions that have been in place, in some cases, it's because of concerns about dual-use items and making sure that Israel could see and verify what was going in, given the history of dual use. In some instances, it's because of the war conditions that make it incredibly difficult. But there are also things that Israel can, should, and must do to further facilitate the distribution of aid, including much more effective deconfliction with those who are providing it. So convoys that are bringing the aid in can go about their work safely and securely. That remains insufficient.
Senator Paul.
Secretary Blinken, on your recent trip to China, news reports came back and said that you reserved your strongest language for China and its dealings with Russia, castigating Beijing for allowing the war to continue in Ukraine. The report went on to describe the exchange as such a blatant dressing down in the Chinese capital. Do you think publicly scolding China will make it more or less likely that they continue selling dual-use parts to Russia?
Senator, we've tried it both ways. We've had these conversations with China from some time in private, hoping to see a change. We haven't seen that, and it's important.
I would argue that we've only tried it one way. We've got the stick, and almost the majority of people who work for you, everybody wants to use the stick. Nobody's really considering that there's a carrot. So really, for the last, let's say, 5 years or more, your administration, the previous administration, not a lot different, really, that you put impediments to trade, you add sanctions, and then you scold them. And I mean, there is a school of philosophy or a school of diplomacy that believes that public scolding, particularly in another country, can have the opposite effects, that actually you've either completely given up on this, nothing's working, so why don't we just read them the Riot Act? And that's kind of what it looked like. Yellen was also there recently, and she's described and told the Chinese government how it should run its economy, what sectors of its economy that they should or should not subsidize, and told them as well who they can conduct business with. And then she threatened to impose sanctions, more or less likely to actually get them to do. I mean, I think it's a misunderstanding of diplomacy in general to think that you going and scolding the Chinese, Yellen going and scolding the Chinese, that somehow they're going to go, oh my goodness, we've been wrong all along, and because they've yelled at us and treated us like school children, we're now going to change. I would think that the opposite might be true, that there might be a certain amount of child psychology to criticizing people, and that like a rebellious teenager, they actually might end up doing more. In addition to the threat of sanctions, in addition to the scolding, we now have the administration talking about more tariffs. So in June of 2019, then presidential candidate Joe Biden tweeted, "Trump doesn't get the basics. He thinks his tariffs are being paid for by China." Any freshman econ student would tell you that the American people are paying his tariffs. Remarkably accurate and true at that time, but now he's become jumping on the Trump train. But the thing about tariffs, regardless of who pays them, American consumers will pay for these. Tariffs are not good for the economic well-being of all Americans in general. But the question would become, when you add tariffs, so you're going to threaten sanctions, you're going to scold them, now you're going to add tariffs. More or less likely that they'll do what you want? I think less likely. Everything we're doing, everything the previous administration did, as well as this administration, is heading towards less trade, disengagement from China. Part of diplomacy might be offering, well, I tell you what if you quit selling the dual-use parts to Russia? Maybe we could consider removing some sanctions on trade and actually trade more with you. So the threat of sanctions, the threat of tariffs, actually have some effects if you're willing to remove them. The history of sanctions is more, and then you're not doing enough, and people on the right here will say you got to do even more, we're going to pass legislative sanctions. Nobody talks about removing them, but that's the only way you'd get behavior to change. And so I really think that it's a fundamental misunderstanding sort of what's going on. The final point I would like to make, and I'll let you respond to this, is the Ukrainians still claim that victory includes the reclamation of all of its territory. Many NATO allies are beginning to question this. Czech President Petr Pavel, who once served as the chairman of NATO's military committee, recently stated that he believes it's naive to think that Ukraine will be able to regain the occupied territories from Russia. The commander-in-general of the Ukrainian army, until he was fired by Zelensky, had the same sort of comments. I think that it's not an unreasonable thing to believe that this war may well end in stalemate with people in place. Some say similar to the way Korea was. Nobody likes it, nobody wanted it, nobody agrees the Russians should be there, but they're there and they have a bigger army and more might than their neighbor. So if President Pavel is correct in his assessment that Ukraine's war aims are naive, one of the few negotiating items Ukraine possesses is a promise to remain a neutral country, not aligned militarily. Yet you have repeatedly ruled out Ukraine remaining outside of NATO. If you take this off the table, you're taking off one of the things that actually is a negotiating item. My question to you is, are there any circumstances under which neutrality of Ukraine would be a negotiating item?
Thank you, Senator. Let me try to respond to both questions. First, if you want to look at hectoring or haranguing, I would invite you to look at the website of the Chinese Foreign Ministry on a daily basis in terms of what they say about us. Second, I'm not going to apologize to anyone for standing up for American workers and American companies, because here's what we're dealing with. And by the way, of course, you're right, we always try. And as a diplomat, I always try to engage our partners or adversaries diplomatically, quietly, to see if we can get the result. If we don't, then we have to use every means at our disposal, including calling them out. Let me, if I may, please address the question. So on this, what we've seen and what we're seeing now, and this goes to the tariff question, is China very deliberately using overcapacity in critical sectors to export its way out of its current economic troubles, and to do that in a way that undercuts and indeed could gut our own workers and industries. All of that is true,
but my question to you is there an offer ever that you would undo things in exchange for behavior?
Of course, and that goes...
So you want to argue tariffs are good and sanctions are good. Yeah. The offer would have to be to say to the government, quietly or otherwise, that we would be willing to go in the opposite direction.
Of course.
There's no public, I hear no public discussion, not from Congress and not from anyone in the administration.
Senator,
we would undo this if this.
Senator, on their own terms, it's clear that if the conduct that we object to and that risks terrible damage to our workers, to our communities, to our companies, if they change that conduct, of course.
Did you specifically discuss not having tariffs or undoing sanctions in exchange for the Chinese to quit selling dual-use parts to Russia?
In the context, sure, if their companies don't engage in that practice, we're not going to sanction them.
I didn't hear any public statements of that. Did you make private statements to President Xi that you would undo trade sanctions and not put on tariffs in exchange for better behavior towards Russia?
By definition, if they don't engage in the conduct that we object to, then we're not going to be using those tariffs or using those sanctions.
But this sounds like me
unfortunately,
drawing this
we've-
out of you. It doesn't sound to me like this is the kind of diplomacy that's occurring. If you want it to occur, you have to have a little different conception of you've got the stick. The whole problem with diplomacy in this country, not just your administration, but the previous, is all you see is the stick, all you see is more sanctions. And if I ask you to tell me what has China done to change its behavior based on your sanctions, to change their behavior for the better, I would say you can't come up with anything China's doing. Everything seems to be the wrong direction. That's your interpretation. Everything's the wrong direction.
No, we've actually
so the
seen-
sanctions really are not having a value unless you want to negotiate removing sanctions to get better behavior.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. And I want to start by applauding you and the President for your overall approach to foreign policy and national security. You've helped strengthen our alliances, stood up to Putin's aggression, and confronted the challenges posed by China. And the President was right, absolutely right, to travel to Israel in the immediate aftermath of the horrific Hamas terror attacks of October 7th to express our solidarity in word and in deed. But like you, I've been very concerned with the way the Netanyahu government has conducted the war in Gaza. We understand the despicable tactics of Hamas, but we also understand that there's a responsibility to make sure that a just war is fought justly. And I've been especially concerned about the restrictions placed on the delivery of humanitarian assistance to 2 million Palestinians who have nothing to do with Hamas. It only leads to unnecessary human suffering, and as you and Secretary Austin have pointed out, it also undermines our overall strategic objectives and those of Israel. And it also means that on top of everything else, Americans have spent over $300 million to build a temporary pier in Gaza to try to prevent more people from starving. That's the right thing to do, but we had to do it because we couldn't get the Netanyahu government to get more food and other aid through the many land crossings and get it delivered to people safely without over 200 aid workers getting killed, including those killed in the attack on the World Central Kitchen. That's why virtually every international aid organization that has operated worldwide for decades say they've never experienced a worse man-made humanitarian disaster than that in Gaza. That's why the President said at one point, no excuses. And yet, in the recent National Security Memorandum 20 report, the administration cannot even bring itself to conclude what is painfully obvious to anybody paying attention, that for long periods of time, between October 7th and today, the Netanyahu government has failed to comply with the international norms that require it to facilitate and not arbitrarily restrict or deny the delivery of humanitarian assistance to people in desperate need. Mr. Secretary, that hurts our credibility around the world, and it sets a dangerously low bar for what's acceptable going forward. I listened to your exchange with Senator Merkley regarding the use of U.S. weapons. This issue does not require additional investigation. We've seen this play out in real time. And while you concluded in a snapshot that Israel had improved and was doing better, the report required a backwards look, and the administration decided to duck that. You and I have known each other for a long time. I have tremendous respect for you, but I thought that was important to say. I know you and the President are trying 24/7 to bring an end to this conflict. I know you're working 24/7 to bring back all the hostages and make sure that there are no more October 7ths. But as the President and you and others have pointed out, in order to achieve a durable end to the conflict, we need to build a future that has security and dignity and hope for Israelis and Palestinians alike. That is why the President has tried to create some light at the end of this very dark tunnel by calling for recognition of Israel by Saudi Arabia and others, paired with a clear timeline for the establishment of a viable Palestinian state. I listened to your discussion with Senator Murphy. I've lost count, Mr. Secretary, of exactly how many times you've actually traveled to Israel and the region. My staff tells me it's about 7, is that right? So you, the National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense, 2 aircraft carrier deployments, billions of dollars in military assistance, hundreds of millions to build a pier. Our very important work to intercept the Iranian missiles launched at Israel. So would you agree that it's in our national security interests to have a plan in place to achieve a two-state solution within a clearly defined period of time, paired with normalization of relations with countries like Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I would.
And I want to raise this because, for a long time, the U.S. policy has been in favor of two-state solution. I mean, formally announced during George W. Bush's administration, so over 2 decades. And despite the fact that we say those words, we have never addressed our policy to use our influence to make it happen. You would agree, would you not, that the continued expansion of illegal settlements and outposts in the West Bank makes it harder to achieve a two-state solution?
I would.
And yet, if you look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's extremist government, that, as you know, includes people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, since they came into power, and while the war in Gaza has been raging, we've witnessed the largest land seizures in the West Bank in decades. In fact, during your visit in March, Finance Minister Smotrich, who also has a West Bank portfolio under the Minister of Defense, announced the single largest West Bank land grab. And the question is, what are we going to do if it conflicts with our national security interests to try to achieve a two-state solution? I applaud the actions taken with respect to individual extremist settlers, but they are just part of a movement largely empowered by this current government. I don't know if you had a chance, Mr. Secretary, to read the New York Times Magazine this weekend. Israel's extremist takeover by 2 veteran journalists, including an Israeli investigative reporter. I urge you to look at it. So my question is, if we agree about our national security interests, what are we going to do to make sure that we achieve the goal, not only of normalization, I heard the conversation, but that, as you said, has to be paired with a Palestinian state and a timeline. What is the plan to get there with a timeline that is meaningful?
Well, thank you, Senator. And look, I agree with the assessment. And it's not only in our national security interest, which is my responsibility. It's also, in our judgment, as Israel's closest friend, in Israel's profound interest, because there really is a choice, and it's very hard to see it in the midst of this conflict, and certainly in the wake of October 7th. But the choice that's increasingly clear is a choice between a path that leads to Israel normalizing its relations with virtually all of its neighbors, something it's sought from its founding, to have countries that actually have its back when it comes to security and the primary threat that it faces, and many of us face, which is from Iran, and to be, again, genuinely integrated into the region, versus a continuation of the course that we're on and it's on, which is endless cycles of violence, destruction, death, and insecurity. But to move down that first path, it requires not only the willingness of the countries in question to normalize relations, but it also requires that there be finally a resolution to the Palestinian question, the realization of a state. That is clearly what these countries need to see and want to see in order for this to happen. And that's one of the things that we've been working on. The bottom line is this. You've got 5 million Palestinians between the West Bank and Gaza. You've got about 7 million Israeli Jews. Neither is going anywhere. The Palestinians are not going anywhere. The Jews are not going anywhere. There has to be an accommodation. And there has to be an accommodation that respects and fulfills the rights of everyone concerned. It has to be done in a way that has the necessary guarantees for Israel's security. And we are and will be adamant about that.
Senator
But
Rickett.
that's the only path forward to sustainable security.
Senator Rickett.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Last Sunday, the British Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, was asked if the UK would follow President Biden's lead on withholding weapons to Israel. He responded that when he last came under pressure to announce an arms embargo, quote, "A few days later, there was a massive Iranian attack on Israel, so I don't think it would have been a wise path." He continued, "If I announced today, it might help me get through this television interview, but actually it would strengthen Hamas, it would weaken Israel. I think it probably makes a hostage deal less likely," end quote. Hamas hasn't released a hostage since the end of November. And shockingly, this administration, starting in December, has been ratcheting up the pressure against Israel. Now, according to Arab mediators dealing with Hamas, Hamas Gaza chief Yahya Sinwar believes that he's already won the war, whether or not he survives it. He's indicated to mediators that time is on his side and that the longer he waits, the more international pressure builds on Israel and the more damage is done to the relationship between the United States and Israel. Secretary Blinken, please explain why a bunch of 20-somethings on liberal college campuses are right, and the administration thinks they're right by pursuing this policy, and Lord Cameron, who is the foreign minister of one of our closest allies, is wrong when he says that blocking weapons to Israel would strengthen Hamas's hand.
Thank you, Senator. Let me be clear about two things. First, no one will do more to defend Israel than President Biden. He was there days after. October 7th, we deployed significant assets to the region to make sure that we could deter any further aggression and a widening of the war against Israel. When Iran unleashed an unprecedented attack on Israel, the first attack, as you know, from Iran directly onto Israel, for the first time, the United States actively participated in Israel's defense. We brought together a coalition of countries to do the same thing, and what could have been a devastating attack by Iran was thwarted, and thwarted very effectively. In terms of what we provided to Israel, again, no one has done more than Joe Biden, going back to when he was vice president, including getting the MOU that led to a 10-year agreement to provide Israel with the assistance that it needs to defend itself. We have one weapon system that we have been holding back pending discussions with Israel about how and where it would be used because of the concerns that we've clearly expressed over many months about the possibility of a full-on military assault on Rafah, a dense urban environment where using something like a 2,000-pound bomb could have terrible consequences for the civilians. This is something that needed to be discussed. It's deeply unfortunate that that discussion leaked to the press when it was a private discussion between us and Israel. It did, and when the president was asked about it, he responded forthrightly. But there's no final decision, and it remains subject to discussion. But when it comes to making sure that Israel has everything it needs to defend itself, no one has. No one will do more than President Biden.
So you agree with Lord Cameron's assessment, though, that you're strengthening Hamas's hand by having this leak get out?
No, again, leaks are an unfortunate part of the business that we're all engaged in. It's really regrettable, but it happens. But it's also something that's not a leak is the fact that we've been both public and private about the fact that we have deep concerns about a major military operation in Rafah. And by the way, we've been working closely with the Israelis on other ways to achieve what we agree needs to be the result.
How is putting more pressure on Israel helping? How is that helping them win this conflict against what you described yourself as a terrorist organization and an enemy?
Not a question of putting pressure on them. It's a question when your close friend is going down a path that you think may be counter to its interests and potentially our own as well, then, of course, we have conversations with them. That's what we're supposed to do. That's the nature of the relationship. We have a better way of dealing with the ongoing problem that Hamas represents in Gaza and in Rafah specifically.
So what kind of pressure are you putting on Hamas?
Oh, what kind of pressure are we putting on Hamas?
When's the last time you called for Hamas to surrender?
Virtually every day.
Virtually every day?
Yes,
you called
virtually every day. I have said, Senator, that the single quickest way to end this is for Hamas to surrender, to give up its weapons, to release the hostages, to stop hiding behind civilians. I've said that from day one, and I continue to say it. And I agree with you. One of the things that's deeply regrettable is not by us, but just across the board, the extent to which Hamas has, disappeared from the conversation, as if they have nothing to do with anything, when they could. And I think you're 100% right. They could end this tomorrow by, yes, giving up, surrendering. We've called for that repeatedly. I wish more countries around the world were doing that.
Well, I agree with you 100% on what you just said there, because you're absolutely right. This all ends tomorrow if Hamas surrenders. And then the civilians would be able to get the aid. There wouldn't be any war there. I mean, Hamas is using the civilians as human shields. You told yourself about how they're hiding in hospitals and schools and stuff to fight the Israelis. Hamas is the problem here. Hamas is the one who started this on October 7th when they broke the ceasefire and committed the atrocities. They have to be rooted out. They have to be destroyed. We have to have Israel be successful. What do you think of Sinwar's words when he said that he's already won by this delay? I mean,
well, first of all, I haven't seen those words. Second, I would take with more than a grain of salt anything that Mr. Sinwar says about anything. So the fact of the matter is, he is under, and Hamas is under unrelenting pressure. When you're a nihilist, as Sinwar is, it's not entirely clear what effectively will move you. If he believes that there is victory in death, that's a different thing. We can't, we can't necessarily deal with that in the same terms.
Right. Well, here's the deal. We need to make sure Israel is successful. Hamas started this war. Wars are horrible. This is why you don't start them. But now that it's started, Israel has to be successful. During World War II, we had to go into urban areas to be able to root out the Nazis. Israel must be allowed to be able to root out Hamas. Certainly after October 7th, Hamas said they would continue to commit these atrocities, continue to attack Israel. They cannot be allowed to survive. That's why we need to continue to support Israel. And my concern here is that when you start putting conditions on our allies on how they have to win these conflicts, such as you're also doing in Ukraine with saying, hey, you can't go after long-range Russian stuff, blah, blah, blah. When we start doing that, our allies around the world wonder if these so-called ironclad commitments are going to be ironclad in the future. We've got to support our allies to win, and when we send mixed messages, then our allies start questioning our commitment, and that leads to a more dangerous world, Mr. Secretary. So we've got to continue to support Israel. Please make sure you are doing that and stop strengthening the Hamas's hand by somehow signaling that somehow we are showing any weakness. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. Secretary Blinken, thanks for your superb service and for being here today. I have three quick items, then I want to get back to Israel, Gaza on the humanitarian dimension. First, I really believe that Congress should lift its hold on the support to the multinational security force in Haiti, and I worry that the refusal to do that is really complicating our maybe small ability to push this in the right direction. If Congress does not release the hold on appropriated funds to fund this security force, what's going to happen?
Well, if we don't have those funds available, then it's going to be very hard to move forward with the security force. And look, again, I understand and respect those who express concerns about the success given the history, but I think we have a very clearly defined and achievable mission for the security force, which is to bolster the police and put them in a position where they can reassert effective control.
It was hard. It was hard work for you guys to get Kenya to agree to lead this. If we don't come through on our financial commitment, isn't it pretty likely that they'll back?
They will. They certainly will.
And then who would take up the mantle if the U.S. is not providing?
No, I think that's
support?
exactly right. The Kenyan president will be in Washington this week for a state visit. It would be good if we could fully deliver on our commitment. But second, I just say too, here's an instance where I know some people have concerns about the United States being the quote-unquote policeman of the world. Well. Here's a situation where Kenya and a number of other countries have stepped up and are willing to take this on, but they need support.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a second one. This is very parochial. The State Department requested medical providers in Northern Virginia to snap together to provide medical services to Afghans coming into Dulles Airport. When Afghans came in the summer of 2021, they largely came into Dulles. 3 of the 8 resettlement sites were in Virginia, and we now have more Afghans than any other state from that initial wave, and we're proud of it. Our Afghans are doing great work. I've met some training to be shipbuilders. They worked with us in Kabul, and now they're training to be shipbuilders and help our industrial base. But the healthcare providers that responded to the State Department haven't been paid. They did all this medical service. It was about $630,000. It's not that big an amount. We've been asking over and over and over again that they be paid. We sent a letter to the State Department that was bicameral in January. Haven't gotten a response back. Will you work with me to make sure that these folks who jumped to attention when the State Department asked are treated fairly so that if you ask, they may do it again?
Yeah. Happy to work with you on this. We have looked into this, and we have some further information that we can share with you. But the initial bottom line is that we had our procurement executive investigate this. We learned that the company in question acted apparently on its own, maybe out of very good motivation, but without any contractual agreement with the Department of State or with the Cherokee Nation in this case.
Well,
So
I
we
want
need
to follow up because the
can-
ones that I'm talking about are folks who are directly requested.
I'm
by the
happy to
State
follow up with you
Department.
on that.
And then third, this is really for Senator Haggerty and me. We have a company, Vulcan, that's a U.S.-based firm that's got presence in Virginia, Tennessee, and other U.S. states. They own a port and land in Mexico. AMLO has tried to appropriate that land twice, even with police and military invasions of the property. I'd rather not get into that now, but I would love your commitment to work with me to make clear to the Mexican government that appropriating the private property of American companies would be very bad for this important relationship that we have with Mexico.
Yeah, I believe that's subject to a proceeding in arbitration right now, but we certainly made the generic point to the government of Mexico, including to the president, that yes, seizure of private companies is not a good way to attract investment.
On Israel-Gaza, I think my colleagues, Senator Merkley and Senator Van Hollen, have dug into this, but I want to particularly focus on what I call Pillar 2 of NSM 20, which is a certification that a nation receiving U.S. military assistance is cooperating with U.S.-supported humanitarian efforts. I think the Pillar 1, making a determination about whether Israel is or is not using these weapons in accord with international law is more complex. But on the humanitarian side, look, World Central Kitchen aid workers killed, other UN aid workers killed, settlers attacking humanitarian aid convoys on the West Bank, throwing stuff off the truck, setting the aid on fire, setting the trucks on fire. The U.S. having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build a pier in Gaza. Virginians from Fort Eustis are building that pier and deployed to do it. All of that to me says you wouldn't have, none of that would be happening if Israel was fully cooperating. It took too long to open Kerem Shalom. It took way too long to open Erez. I think, my editorial opinion, you've already answered questions about this, certifying that on that record, the humanitarian efforts of Israel to help Gazans who are non-combatants, who aren't part of Hamas, is sufficient. I think that's grading on a curve that if that's sufficient, then anything's sufficient. I don't think it's anywhere near sufficient. I don't think it's in the time zone of sufficient. I agree it's more than was started. I mean, at the beginning, members of the Israeli cabinet said it was going to be a complete siege against Gaza. And I know that President Biden was able to get an agreement finally to open up the Erez crossing. But I think calling this state of affairs sufficient cooperation with U.S. humanitarian effort, I just think that demeans the credibility of the administration. And I think you should have said, you're not getting a passing grade on this, and then laid out what more needs to be done. The number of trucks going in. When Cindy McCain, the widow of a former member of this committee, talks about the famine that's resulting, I mean, I just don't see how the U.S. can say that's enough. I mean, I credit my colleagues of saying, let Israel defeat Hamas. Let Israel, with our help, knock down Iranian drones and missiles. I'm all for that. But the punishment of non-combatant civilians, the killing of aid workers, the ransacking of humanitarian aid convoys with the idea of doing very little to stop it, how can that be sufficient?
Well, we have, as you know, Senator, from day one, been working on this every single day. And that includes going back to October, getting the initial crossings open, including in October, Rafah, then later Kerem Shalom.
In December, 2 months later.
In December, yes. So this is
Erez in March or April.
Erez, crossing 96, the Jordanian route, et cetera. At the time of the report, the NSM, which, by the way, I applaud as I think an effective and helpful vehicle in terms of concentrating minds and focusing minds on this. I think we've seen that the assurances that we received in March, the question was, from the time we received those assurances to the time that the report was issued, did we judge them to be credible and reliable when it came to humanitarian assistance? And we saw during that period Israel take overdue, but important steps to actually expand significantly the provision of humanitarian assistance.
On that statement, I don't disagree. They took steps between March and May, but I think the steps were still
well, when we laid it, and I think the report
woefully
itself, if you
inadequate.
read the report, as I know you did carefully, I think the report lays that out very clearly.
Well, I'm gonna call on Senator Scott because he's next, but I just think on the factual record, yeah, improvement since March, yes. I still think it falls so far below the hurdle that I don't think that warranted a passing grade. With that, I'm going to go to Senator Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us this morning. I'll take a very different tack than Senator Kane on our support of our allies. I mean, one of the challenges I see around the country, around the world right now, is that it seems like the world is on fire, in part because of the weakness of our administration, the Biden administration. You think about the fact that China stares across the Taiwan Straits, or the Kremlin sets its sights further west, or Iran comes out of the shadows and starts attacking our strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel. You think about the fact that in the Sahel, terrorism seems to be spreading faster than ever before, and to me it just seems very clear that without question, the weakness of this administration emboldens our adversaries. And frankly, if there should be no daylight between Israel and America, it seems like there is a lot of daylight. The more decisions that are made from the administration to withhold shipments of weapons, the more challenges that we have. And frankly, if we're concerned about saving innocent lives, seems like to me we would provide the resources that make dumb bombs smart by having the precision technology that has been held up on tarmacs and frankly in shipping the weapons. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how it is in Israel's best interest and our relationship with Israel and that best interest that we hold back not just the shipments of the weapons, but the very precision technology that's necessary to turn these bombs into clearly better weapons and reduces casualties.
Well, Senator, first and very quickly, it won't surprise you that I disagree with your overall judgment.
I don't. What doesn't surprise me at all. You're right.
When it comes to China and Taiwan, we brought countries around the world together to stand up for maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, to make sure that China does not engage in any unilateral actions that change the status quo. And China is hearing that from country after country, in no small measure because of our own engagement, our own diplomacy. When it comes to Russia and Ukraine, we've rallied.
Let's have a little just a dialogue on that. Here's one of the things I'd say in response to that. It's when you show weakness anywhere, it affects strength everywhere. When you have a botched Afghanistan challenge, when the president says that a small incursion in Ukraine might be acceptable, when he says to Putin that here's a list of areas not to cyber attack, the weakness in posture, I think, emboldens our adversaries. And so while you may be able to name some specific things that have been done, hopefully to reduce the impact, from my perspective, most of the world really respects strength, and that's about all they respect.
They respect strength and they respect wisdom. And what I'm seeing and hearing around the world is that we're demonstrating both. We've made major investments in ourselves that have put us in very good standing around the world, particularly in the competition with China as well as with Russia in different ways. We've managed to rally 50 countries in Ukraine's defense, prevented Russia from erasing Ukraine from the map, making sure that it has what it needs to defend itself, to stand up and even push back the Russian aggression. When it comes to Iran, as you mentioned as well, and I mentioned this, I think maybe, Senator, before you were in the room, when Iran engaged in an unprecedented attack on Israel, the first time that Iran had directly attacked Israel, for the very first time, the United States actively participated with our military in the defense of Israel. That had never happened before. We rallied other countries to Israel's defense. We thwarted what could have been a devastating attack, and I think the message was very clearly received in Iran, throughout the region, and around the world.
Let me ask you this question.
Please.
Part of the challenge that I see there is there's no doubt that the coalition that was available for the response it was a strong one. I think part of that was because of the Abraham Accords. Normalizing relationships in the Middle East was actually impactful. So I thought to myself, this is strong to see the countries coming together in a coalition in defense. However, part of the challenge, of course, is that on October the 7th, the first thoughts that come out of the administration before they deleted it was to tell Israel to pause, is a challenge. The second thing is that you don't have to have a coalition defending Israel if there are no attacks from Iran. And so the fact of the matter is that the more we strengthen and embolden Iran by eliminating any of the hurdles being the sanctions, allowing their oil to flow easier, the November decision to provide $10 billion, the August decision to provide $6 billion. The fact of the matter is that the 35% of the Iranian economy is driven by sale of energy. So the fact is that when we open that up, we're actually strengthening our adversary, not making them weaker.
In fact, Senator, not a single sanction has been lifted on Iran, and in fact, we've imposed sanctions.
Relaxing
on more than 500 Iranian
basically
individuals and entities. No, we haven't lifted a single sanction.
Well, I would say talk to Secretary Yellen about the conversation that we've had and that continues to be had about the fact that we're making it easier for Iran to sell their oil, which only increases their revenue, which then is used, 90% of it, to attack our allies.
Well, in the case of the $6 billion that you referenced,
yes.
Iran has not accessed any of that. That was a channel that was established by the previous administration to find a secure way.
You are a really intelligent guy. You're a really intelligent guy. The fact of the matter is that we all know that money is fungible. So let's not pretend that we don't know that. So you put a credit on a balance sheet. The bottom line is you should expect that credit to be used in any form or fashion that they decide to do so. So do you think our not having the IAEA Board of Governors censure Iran was a good thing or not?
It depends entirely on what we're trying to achieve and the best way to achieve it. More than unfortunately, one of the worst decisions made was to get out of the Iran nuclear agreement, which would put Iran's nuclear program in a box. Now we're dealing with a situation where the restraints that were imposed on Iran by that agreement gone away, and Iran has been proceeding whole hog toward developing the fissile material that it needs to produce nuclear weapons on very short order. We had breakout time pushed back beyond a year. Breakout time is now 2 to 3 weeks. So one of the critical things is, and we've lost access that we've had, one of the critical things is to make sure that the IAEA has
the chairman would
access it needs.
Allow a response.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And whether and what the most effective way at the IAEA is to get the access it has, and also to ensure that Iran is moving back on the steps that it's taken to enrich its material.
I'll just say this, that anyone who thinks that having a nuclear Iran is going to make them more peace-filled is ridiculous, number one. Number two, to suggest that somehow the JCPOA was the contract that stopped Iran from doing anything. In the midst of the JCPOA, they were already testing ballistic missiles. They had breached the JCPOA so many times that it was remarkable that we would even have a conversation about bringing that back into the conversation.
So
for us to have a conversation about the JCPOA and how bad it was, sure, to have a conversation about its effectiveness,
let's look
I think it's remarkable.
At where we were and where we are as a result of getting out of the JCPOA.
Senator,
here's
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I look forward to our hearing later today on the budget for the State Department. And I just was going to speak to one thing first before I move to some substantive questions. It's been posited that the world's on fire because of weakness. And I'm simply going to assert that the greatest strength that you and our president have shown is in building our alliances in the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, AUKUS, a strengthened and renewed partnership between Japan, Korea, and the United States. Really remarkable successes in stabilizing and strengthening the Indo-Pacific through alliances. In the response to Russia's aggression in Ukraine, an incredible global alliance of 50 different countries coming to Ukraine's defense, providing financing, imposing and enforcing sanctions. Really remarkable. And in the defense of Israel against 300 missiles and drones fired by Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UK, France would not have joined us in the defense of Israel, but for President Biden's leadership. So I'm just simply going to assert that. Can I ask you whether it in any way weakens us to have country after country, year after year, have no ambassador confirmed by the Senate? Is it important that we confirm nominees to serve as ambassadors?
Thank you, Senator. It does hurt us, and it is imperative that we get ambassadors confirmed. And here's why. We're in, as we've talked about already today, in a global competition, notably with China, when we don't have an ambassador in place, a Senate-confirmed ambassador. But the Chinese have a fully accredited ambassador in place in a given country. Their ambassador may get in to see the president and the prime minister on a given issue. Ours, no matter how good our charge may be, may not. And that puts us right there, just in that one example, at a competitive disadvantage.
As you know well, economic competition with China and with other actors is a key priority for this administration and for many of us. I recently had a chance to go to Angola and to see the impact of the Lobito corridor. I'll soon be traveling to the Philippines and get a chance to see the Luzon corridor. How important is it that we utilize new tools like the Development Finance Corporation and leverage multilateral resources to give our partners the opportunity to have more transparent, more sustainable, higher quality investment opportunities for key infrastructure?
Look, it's vital that we provide a better choice. And we do that by doing a few things. Using all the tools of government to be able to leverage private sector investment, because our comparative advantage is bringing the private sector to these projects. We're never going to outcompete China or anyone else on state dollars, dollar to dollar. That's not how we do things. But we can use these instruments to facilitate the private sector playing the role. And yes, it's to marshal the resources of other countries in a coordinated way so that together we can have a greater impact and have a better offer.
Exactly.
And we do it in a way that becomes a race to the top, whether it's dealing with corruption, environmental standards, worker rights, making sure countries don't get loaded down with debt. All of those things are part of the offer that we bring to this. And I know that when we're able to make that offer, there's no question the countries around the world prefer to work with us.
This week, President Ruto of Kenya is here for an important state visit. He'll have a chance to meet with some congressional leaders, to obviously meet with our president. You are hosting him at the State Department. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is having, I think, a very positive meeting with the Secretary of Commerce. We have a very talented ambassador there who comes out of the private sector and has applied a lot of her insights and talents. This is just another reminder that we need to show up. We need to have confirmed ambassadors. We need to have robust and innovative financing tools. Kenya has really suffered through massive floods, record drought, and locusts. And one of the things I'm concerned about is food security and how food insecurity leads to instability. Because hungry people move, and hungry people engage in conflict, and hungry people, more than anything, suffer. And as Cindy McCain at the World Food Program and others have recently said publicly, 330 million people globally are food insecure, and something like 800 million people will go to bed tonight. Senator Graham and I have introduced a bill to create the Foundation for Food Security that would use blended finance tools, risk insurance, first loss guarantees to help catalyze programs that many of us worked together for many years, like Feed the Future, to have more of a transformational impact on national agricultural systems. Do you think this is a wise and appropriate investment?
I do, and obviously I need to look more at the specifics of the bill, but the basic idea, the basic approach, I think is a very good one, because it's exactly as you just said. It's having that transformational impact. Look, we're the lead provider of emergency food assistance to people around the world. We're overwhelmingly the #1 funder of the World Food Program. We provide about 1/3 of its budget. I hear tremendous gratitude around the world for the work the United States does on an emergency basis. But what I hear even more than that is a desire for the investments to be made that have a transformational impact so that countries have the productive capacity to effectively feed themselves and feed others. And so I think doing that, bringing public-private together in a focused way, can make a big difference. I'll add one very quick thing. Feed the Future that USAID runs is one of the most important programs that we have in the government. It's making a difference in lives around the world. We've added to it something called the Vision for Adopted Crops and Soil, because one thing that we've understood, if you have nutritious and resilient seeds that can resist the ravages of climate change, extreme weather, et cetera. And we have them. We know what they are. We know how to make them. And you have the abilities we now do to actually monitor the quality of soil anywhere and to remediate where it's necessary. You put those two things together, and that's the foundation for sustainable productive capacity. So part of our budget is to make sure that that program, starting in Africa, but now also in our own hemisphere, including in Guatemala, is appropriately resourced.
I look forward to talking with you further this afternoon about how we could sustain Carrie Fowler's work and how we can continue to fund innovation and sustain the work of our diplomats and development professionals around the world. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. You know, yesterday the State Department issued a statement mourning the death of the Iranian president. Now, I assume as Secretary you share that sentiment?
We expressed official condolences, as we've done when countries, adversaries, enemies or not, have lost leaders. It changes nothing about the fact that Mr. Raisi was engaged in reprehensible conduct, including repressing his own people for many years as a judge. And that as president, it changes not a whit about our policy, but it's something that we've done many times in the past, going back many administrations and many decades, and we do as a normal course of business.
Well, I don't think it should be a normal course of business. I think it's shocking that this administration would mourn the death of the butcher of Tehran. I don't. He's responsible for death, rape, torture, a sworn enemy of the free world. So I think it's a terrible mistake, Mr. Secretary. I want to move on to another issue in terms of some of the evacuations and retreats that are happening around the world. Since the deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021, the administration has urgently evacuated Americans at several embassies across the globe. I hadn't expected to hear about this in Wyoming, but I heard about it again in Wyoming just this past weekend. Whether it's in Burma, Belarus, Sudan, Haiti, there seems to be a dangerous growing trend of the U.S. in retreat. The United States has been forced to draw down, evacuate, and close numerous diplomatic posts. It used to be rare to see images of U.S. troops flying to the rescue to evacuate our embassies, but it's becoming a more common sight under this administration. 2023, U.S. troops and 3 helicopters airlifted 70 American employees from Sudan. 2024, in Haiti, U.S. military airlifted over 30 stranded Americans. It appears the administration has become the administration of evacuations. During your leadership as Secretary of State, how many embassies have we had to close or evacuate?
Senator, we are operating and living in a very dangerous world. We have Americans all over the world. We have embassies all over the world. It's important that wherever we can, we be represented and our diplomacy is able to move forward, as has been the case many times in the past, whether it was in Venezuela in 2019, whether it was in Yemen in 2015, in Libya in 2014, in Syria in 2012, in Libya again in 2011, in Lebanon in 2006. I could go down the list. Sometimes you run into crises where either an embassy has to shut down for some period of time, or you have Americans who are in harm's way. And in the past, we have, as a country, not often engaged in the evacuation of Americans, but we see it as our responsibility when Americans are in harm's way to try to do that. In the instances that you've cited, that's exactly what we did. You have a crisis, you have some kind of situation that runs the risk of putting at harm either our own embassy employees or Americans who may be there. We're going to make sure that job number one is protecting our people.
Do you see a unifying underlying factor for this terrible trend, and then how are you addressing that?
I don't. I think each of these situations is distinct. And what I do see is a country that over the last 3 years has renewed its alliances, has revitalized its alliances, has created new ones, so that whether it's with our core allies in Europe, in Asia, or beyond, we don't have to face these situations alone. And I see American leadership that has brought these alliances and partnerships together in ways that were not the case in recent history. And that is a great source of strength for us as we have to deal with a very challenging world.
So the administrations following the withdrawal from Afghanistan left behind weapons, ammunition, and equipment that ultimately armed the Taliban. Now we've announced a withdrawal from Niger. State Department efforts to reestablish relations and engage in diplomacy there have failed. The government there is demanding that we leave. Our nation is withdrawing 1,000 troops from 2 air bases where we conducted important counterterrorism missions for decades. Media reports already indicate that Russian troops have already been deployed to these air bases where American soldiers are located. Do you know how much American taxpayer money has the United States spent on building these bases and training the military there?
We've seen, as you know, Senator, in the case of Niger, a coup that took place. We sought to find a mutually acceptable way to keep our forces there so that they could pursue the counterterrorism mission that they were engaged in. We couldn't reach such an agreement with the current government in Niger, and so we are, pursuant to conversations with them, pulling back our forces. If they're not wanted there, then they won't be there. We will make, as we have, other arrangements in other places to make sure that we can conduct the necessary missions to ensure our security.
Do you not see risk, though, of the American taxpayer-funded bases ultimately ending up in the hands of the Russians? And now we're seeing the Russia's, Wagner mercenary group providing military training and support, Burkina Faso, Mali, and in addition to where you mentioned. How are we countering Russia's newly created foothold in Africa?
Well, there's 2 things. One, of course, is the military element to this, and of course I defer to the Pentagon on the specifics of that, including what they pull out as any forces leave. But second, I think we know that unless you have a comprehensive approach that works to try to shore up these countries economically, democratically, socially, the military piece is necessary, but it's insufficient. And we have, thanks to the work of Congress, in countries adjacent to the Sahel, the Global Fragility Act, which gives us 10-year plans to help countries get on their feet in a sustainable way. And that creates partnerships that allow us to sustain, as necessary, a military presence. But you have very fragile countries in the Sahel. And yes, there have been a series of non-democratic transitions or coups in these countries, and that's simply a fact of life. Now, I believe that we can bring much more to the table than the Russians can, for example. And when countries experience what the Russians bring to the table in terms of the exploitation of their resources, the brutalization of their people, actually more violence and more extremism, more terrorism, they tend to change their minds and have a different perspective on this. It's unfortunate that some countries have to find out the hard way that is not the recipe to their security or their success.
Well, thank you. I would add that once they find out the hard way, it may be very difficult for them to extract themselves from the domination of the Russians and come back to us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being with us today. I've appreciated your commentary on everything from the situation in Gaza to the situation in Haiti. I want to pick up where Senator Barrasso did on issues regarding Africa. I've been traveling across the continent, and the thing that always affects me is the enormity of the potential. And I know we're dealing with the crises of today. The truth of the matter is, by 2050, as you know, 1 out of every 4 human beings on the planet will be on the African continent. 1 out of every 3 working age humans will be on the African continent. It is a continent with vast resources, vast human potential, and it is, in many ways, the investments we make today will help to deal with a lot of the challenges when it comes to democracy and, unfortunately, global competition with countries like China and Russia that do not share the world order's rules, clearly. And I was appreciating what you said to the senator about what it is to how we're trying to deal with the democratic threats. Obviously, the backsliding in Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Mali, all in the Sahel region has me very, very concerned. And seeing the challenges that are now in Togo, Benin, Ghana, in the north of those countries, including Nigeria, it's very sobering to me when it comes to the challenges of democracy. I was very affirmed by your fiscal year 2025 budget request that includes $411 million for democracy, rights, and governance programs in Africa. It's a sizable increase from the $284 million allocated in fiscal year 2023. Could you just talk a little bit to how the administration is adjusting regional assistance programs and priorities in response to the Democratic backsliding that I've discussed and clearly others?
Thank you very much. And look, exactly as you've said, Senator, and as I know you've been deeply engaged on, we see the extraordinary positive potential in Africa, not just the challenges of the moment. And for us, when we have a continent that's going to have 1 out of every 4 people on Earth on that continent, when we see the fastest growing populations on Earth, before COVID, actually, the fastest growing economies, as you know, we want to make sure that we are supporting that positive evolution, and particularly making sure that young people with growing populations have positive outlets and positive opportunities. But you're right, we also see this democratic backsliding, particularly in the Sahel. And that's where we've had these recent coups. So we have to be, and our budget reflects this, committed to longer-term stability, opportunity, human development, making the investments in health, in education, in economic empowerment, in democratic governance in these countries. We're working to do that. Obviously, in the countries that have been on the receiving end of coups, there's some limits that we have to abide by when it comes to the assistance we can continue to provide, but we're trying to make sure that when it comes to what's vital, we're providing it. But then on democracy more broadly, we just came from our 3rd Summit for Democracy that Korea hosted, and this was not exclusive to Africa, but I think there's a very positive, affirmative agenda for the kinds of things that we can do and are doing to try to shore up democratic governance, to try to shore up the institutions, to try to combat corruption, which saps at...
Absolutely, and I'm encouraged by that, the focus on corruption. A lot of people are focusing just on elections. It seems that the administration is making such a significant investment in anti-corruption efforts, as well as other things that make for a vibrant democracy, and I'm grateful for that. I just want to, obviously, as you can imagine, talk about Sudan. It was perhaps one of the most... the enormity of what I saw when I was at the Chad-Sudan border is like nothing I've seen before. And I've traveled to refugee camps from the Syrian-Jordanian border to even the camps at the border in Mexico right now. But I've just never seen a scale of human suffering like that. I'm grateful for Tom Perriello and the president's appointment of a special envoy. But is the department providing that special envoy the kind of budget they need or the authority over any Sudan program funds to support his work?
The short answer is I believe we are, and Tom Perriello has done an extraordinary job getting out of the gate fast and moving to do what we can to tackle this crisis. I agree with you. I think, unfortunately, it's something that's not gotten the visibility that that it deserves, given the amount of suffering that's going on. You've got 8.5 million displaced people. You have 18 million people in desperate need of food aid. And of course, you have the violence and atrocities that are being committed by both sides against innocent civilians. So, Senior Envoy Perriello is fully authorized and, reports directly to me and works in close collaboration with our Assistant Secretary for Africa to work to press for an end to the war, to make sure that we have unhindered access for humanitarian assistance, to stop the violence, to try to get a return to the democratic transition, to get a unified civilian approach to this. We think the best vehicle for trying to move forward on that is through the Jeddah process or Jeddah negotiations.
And getting all the players.
And getting everyone around the table.
Same table.
Exactly.
I want to just jump in with my final minute. First of all, thank you for your comments on the ICC recent actions. I think you called it wrong-headed. I would completely agree with the administration's comments on it. It seems to violate common sense that you have a negotiation going on and could really undermine the resolution of this when you have a terrorist leader like Sinwar being put in, it's sort of equating them to a leader of a duly elected leader who actually has regular elections, but more importantly, we know that Sinwar is doing everything he can to isolate Israel, to put themselves on the same footing. The jurisdictional issues, the challenges we have right now with trying to bring this conflict to a resolution, it seems stunning to me that they would take this action. I want to just, though, ask you is how is the Israeli, Egyptian, and humanitarian counterparts to implement a deconfliction mechanism to protect humanitarian workers and civilians, even if or when a ceasefire is reached, without really a mechanism the suffering is going to continue. We need a humanitarian assistance at a large scale. One of the biggest concerns any caring American should have right now is the scale of the humanitarian crisis going on in Gaza. This is not counter to dealing with Hamas, but it is urgent right now at levels that have been mentioned by some of my colleagues, or just the scale of the human suffering there is stunning. The lack of medical provisions, the lack of food. And so there has to be a more coordinated effort amongst the administration to work with Israel, Egypt, and other humanitarian counterparts to make sure that, ceasefire or not, we have the mechanisms to get aid there.
I would ask that you give a brief response.
Simply put, there is, Senator, an intensely coordinated effort to work to do just that. And we have a senior envoy. It had been Ambassador David Satterfield. Now it's Lise Grande, deeply experienced in these matters, working this every single day to do three things. To make sure that we have the aid that is getting in and the appropriate crossings, land, sea, air, to get it in. Second, to make sure that once it gets in, it's effectively distributed to the places and people who need it. And third, and related to that, having effective deconfliction so that the humanitarians who have to move things around aren't endangered as we've seen. And there, I think progress has been made on having this deconfliction and coordination at a sort of 10,000-foot level, but where we continue to have problems is at the tactical or unit level. That is, individual military units that have not adequately gotten the instructions that they need to have a convoy go through. So we're working intensely to get clear protected corridors, clear times where there's no doubt, no ambiguity about people moving humanitarian assistance to the people who need it, among other things, as well as better real-time communications between those who are providing the assistance and those who are on the ground engaged in combat.
Senator Young.
Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you before the committee. I recognize that there are many pressing concerns that require your attention, your time these days. At the same time, I believe that we have the wherewithal, we have the resources to pursue our national interests globally, including in Burma, and that's what I'd like to ask you about. It's been concerning to read and hear reports of bureaucratic delays to American support to opponents of the junta in Burma, support authorized and, in fact, required by Congress in the Burma Act. Secretary Blinken, you have broad authority and sufficient funds, by my reckoning, to distribute non-lethal aid to armed groups and to Burmese society. Items like drones and communications equipment, for example, that could save countless innocent lives. Why has this aid not been fully allocated and dispersed?
Senator, I'd welcome sort of coming back to you on that in detail because I'm not aware of particular delays. Certainly our intent and my intent is to make sure that we're taking advantage of the act and taking advantage of it in a way that allows us to robustly support both the Democratic opposition and ethnic groups, to bring them together in a unified program, to provide them the assistance that they need and the support that they need, even as we're putting pressure on the regime through sanctions. So if there's specific things, I welcome learning them and working with you on that.
Okay. And I'm grateful for that. I will take you up on that, myself, my team, and we'll stay in touch with the committee more broadly. One concern I have is that the department has perhaps made a legal determination that because some non-lethal assistance could conceivably be considered dual use, it couldn't be provided. So I would want to know if that were indeed the case, how we'd square that with the enormous military assistance that Russia and China have been giving the junta. Why don't I move on to some AI discussions that have made news recently. Last week, U.S. officials, including States Acting Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology, met with Chinese officials to discuss international or artificial intelligence governance. Where do you see China's goals for AI governance differing from our own, and how are we confronting the difference in our diplomacy?
So when it comes to AI and when it comes to China and AI, a couple of things worth citing. First, as you may have noted, we got the first resolution through the UN General Assembly with wide support, including even China, on questions of AI governance, and in particular the importance of trying to use AI to advance sustainable development goals to meet the needs of people around the world. And in that, certain basic principles about how AI should be used that very much reflect our views. And to the extent that we can get other countries signed on to those principles to maximize the benefits, minimize any of the potential harms of AI, that's a good thing. We've also gotten strong support around the world on how to think about the use of AI in autonomous weapons. I think those are very important guidelines that hopefully countries will be bound by, including China. And then more specifically, Senator, on China, we thought it's important, irrespective of our profound differences across the board, to at least be talking about how we each respectively see AI, particularly when it comes to questions of safety and security, because we know the extent to which this can be used for grievous ill, not just for benefit. And so this is a good way of at least getting a better understanding of how China is looking at this and sees this, sharing the way that we see it, and seeing if, as you know, in the past, we've had, when it came, for example, to arms control during the Cold War, maybe there are avenues for getting agreements on use and not misuse of artificial intelligence. But right now, this is just a very broad conversation about how we respectively see AI and its development.
Yeah. I'll just state and then move on with an additional question or two. I think it's fine to talk and engage in these sorts of broad discussions, and we may indeed come to terms on something we didn't expect to come to. I think it's equally as important to work with our closest allies and partners to see how we can harmonize our existing standards or evolving standards, and then since we share certain core values, that will give us leverage at the negotiating table.
You're 100% right, and that is what we've done. We've been working through the G7 in particular to try to move out on basic principles and hopefully build out from there.
Relatedly, today South Korea hosts the second AI Safety Summit after last year's summit at Bletchley Park. What role do you see the safety summits playing in the overall AI governance debate?
Look, I think these summits can help establish norms, rules, understandings when it comes to safety that could prove invaluable. The more we can develop a consensus around what these norms and standards and rules should be, the more we or like-minded countries are in the driver's seat, the more effective we're going to be in making sure that AI is used for good and we minimize its use for bad.
And for those who are watching, trying to get clarity on the division of labor within our own government on this topic, what is the diplomatic role that you see the department taking in consultation with Commerce following Secretary Raimondo's announcement of an international network of AI safety institutes?
We're working in very close coordination with Commerce on this, and we both have leadership roles to play, and we've organized our department accordingly. And as you know, and I appreciate supported, we established for the first time a bureau in the department for cyber and digital policy, as well as having an envoy for emerging technology. And we've got the talent at the department to make sure that we have the necessary expertise so that we can play the necessary diplomatic role around the world in trying to align other countries with our vision for the way forward on AI. But of course, Commerce has an absolutely vital role to play, a lead role to play, particularly when it comes to engaging the private sector, and we're fully partnered on that.
Well, I anticipate a lot of future conversation and focus from this committee as it relates to the harmonization of standards development, and ensuring that the standards that prevail and predominate around the world are standards that embed our values on privacy and openness and transparency and human rights and so forth. So thank you for your work in the early stages of what might be characterized as a revolution in AI technology.
And can
Chairman.
I just add one quick thing to this,
Yes.
Senator? I just want to really applaud your leadership broadly in this area, because the work that you've done, the leadership that you showed, particularly on the CHIPS and Science Act, has given us a much stronger hand to play around the world as the United States makes sure that we continue to have the leading technology, the leading industries, and thus are in a stronger position to actually shape those norms, rules, and understandings. A lot of that does go to CHIPS and Science.
Thank you.
We all thank Senator Young for his leadership. He's educated all of us on AI. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Blinken, before I start, I just want to acknowledge the medical and humanitarian workers who need to secure safe access to provide badly needed care. Israeli Americans, including Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who remains hostages of Hamas. The over 100 other hostages who remain unaccounted for or trapped by terrorists in Gaza. And the tens of thousands of lives, Palestinians, Israeli, American, Jordanian, Thai, the list is long and overwhelming, already lost to the latest tragic conflict in the Middle East. My staff and I have relied heavily on the department's close support and collaboration to advocate for Illinoisans and others in Gaza. And I expect we'll need to continue to work closely together to provide assistance and ensure oversight and accountability of the situation. So I want to express my appreciation for all of the department staff for working around the clock with me and my team. My first question has to do with ASEAN. It goes to something we've discussed here last year, the need for sustained, strong investments in our relationships with allies and partners in Southeast Asia. And I applaud the elevation of the U.S.-ASEAN relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership last year and the increases in resources for the U.S. mission to ASEAN. But as I said at the opening of the new U.S.-ASEAN Center in December, China continues to increase its engagement and gain in popularity in the region, and there is so much more that we can do. And that includes showing up. High-level participation at ASEAN summits and ministerial meetings is no longer a nice-to-have option. It's a must-do. I'm still hearing about Indonesia's deep disappointment over last year's ASEAN summit, and I'm sure you are as well. In this chair year for Laos, are we doing enough to support Embassy Vientiane and through them the host government in carrying out successful ASEAN meetings? And can you commit to high-level participation in the upcoming ministerial and ASEAN summit?
Thank you very much, Senator. And I fully agree with you, and I believe the answers to both questions are yes and yes. We're determined to build on what has already been a deeply strengthened partnership and relationship between the United States and ASEAN, including the President hosting, as you know, a special summit with ASEAN here in Washington. My own engagement with ASEAN, and going forward, our support both for Laos as it's in the chair, to do what we can to help it succeed in its chairmanship, and also, yes, be present.
Thank you. I also want to touch on internal reforms you've led at state. Every year, and especially in an election year, the strength of our republic depends on resilient institutions. So I want to commend the critical work of modernizing and strengthening the State Department itself. Important progress has been made, but when it comes to physical accessibility at department facilities, it's been my experience that there is still a lot of work to do. The lack of basic accommodations like ramps and working buttons to open heavy security doors are still serious obstacles to the full participation of persons with disabilities, whether they're employees who need accommodations for themselves or for family members who would join them abroad, or our counterparts and guests. So in last year's state authorization, I included a requirement for the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations to report on accessibility at overseas diplomatic missions and estimate the cost of making our facilities usable by persons with disabilities. Will that report be delivered on time next month? And do you have any insight into what has been learned through the assessment so far? And can you speak more broadly to what the department is doing to ensure employees receive the accommodations they need when they need them through a streamlined and common sense process?
In short, Senator, I'm committed to that. We're committed to that. I want to come back to you on the timing of the report to make sure that it's on time, or if it's not, why not? So I'll come back to you on that. We have a request for an additional $11.5 million in the budget for bolstering accessibility in the department and in our facilities. It's something that I take very seriously, and of course, there is physical accessibility, which is critical. We're also doubling down on efforts with technology to make sure that we have the right technology in the right hands. I think we've made real progress on that, but as always, more can and should be done.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, staffing and retention continue to be challenges, so I'd like to use the rest of my time to speak in more detail about that, including what you've done to address the perennial challenge of employment for foreign service employees. Last year, late last year, I helped introduce the Readiness Act to support federal employees who are relocating to join their spouse on an official assignment. It would require federal government agencies to make the maximum effort to retain them by simply allowing telework or transfer, or as a last resort, a period of leave without pay status. Would you say that current policies at states support this type of common sense flexibility so that a civil servant isn't needlessly faced with the choice of either stay with their family on an overseas deployment when the spouse is being sent to represent our nation overseas, or keep their job and continue their public service career?
We're very much working in that direction, and I think we've made progress. Again, still more to do. We also have the Family Service, the Foreign Service Families Act, that we're working to implement to create greater flexibilities, greater opportunities for family members. We have more and more people who are now serving as eligible family members. We have greater flexibilities for people to make sure that they are able to continue their employment as a spouse or partner when they're overseas. And I think that's part of an ongoing effort to improve those opportunities and to support families, because we know that if we want to not only attract but retain the best people in the department, we have to make sure that we're also providing the support they need for their families. Otherwise, they'll do something else, go somewhere else.
Thank you. Can you speak to the importance of being able to pay competitive rates to local nationals who work at embassies? I've heard this at many of our embassies as I've traveled, and it's not limited to a particular region. I heard it in Europe. I've heard it in Asia, where it is often very hard to maintain quality local staff because they can't be paid at a rate that is competitive, and even though they want to stay with us and they're very loyal. Can you speak to the challenges in your budget?
Yes, that's correct, and I think it's important to start with this. Literally the heart of our enterprise, the State Department, are locally employed staff. About 2/3 of the State Department employees are locally engaged staff. Our embassies can't function without them. And not only do they fill vital functions in the embassies, they're also the most extraordinary connectivity between our embassies and the countries in which we're engaged. In so many countries, the local staff has borne the brunt of global inflation and trying to keep pace with that in countries around the world that are not doing as well as the United States has been a challenge. And you're right, it's in many regions. It's not in any one place. We've taken steps to address this. First, for a number of people, to try to deal with the impact of that, and then just coming out of COVID, which was so devastating for so many, one-time increases in their compensation. Second, we've looked at the way we assess compensation, and we've tried to bring in more criteria so that we better take into account what the actual cost of living is in a given country, not simply a sort of equation to someone in a similarly situated job. So that's now coming into effect. We have worked to budget in, including in this budget, a guaranteed 2% increase every year so people can see that they will have sustained support. And of course, there are other one-time measures that we're looking at to help people. But the bottom line is we have to do this. We need to do this if we're going to sustain our missions, and the budget reflects that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Mr. Secretary, you have presided over the worst foreign policy disaster of modern times. When Joe Biden became president, he inherited peace and prosperity in the world. We now have two simultaneous wars waging, the worst war in Europe since World War II and the worst war in the Middle East in 50 years. Both, I believe, were caused by this administration's consistent weakness. And indeed, your foreign policy is precisely backwards from what a rational American foreign policy should be. To our friends and allies, this administration has consistently undermined, weakened, and attacked them. And to our enemies, this administration has shown constant appeasement and indeed has flowed billions of dollars to the enemies of America who want to kill us. Senator Barrasso asked you about Ibrahim Raisi. Your State Department put out a statement sending condolences for his death. Mr. Secretary, is the world better today now that Raisi is dead?
Given the horrible acts that he engaged in, both as a judge and as president, to the extent he can no longer engage in them, yes, the Iranian people are probably better off.
You didn't say that in your statement, did you?
I believe that we did. And certainly our spokesperson...
Today, the United Nations is flying their flag at half-staff to mourn the death. Would you agree that it is utterly disgraceful for the United Nations to be mourning the death of the butcher of Tehran?
We're certainly not mourning his death. As I said, we expressed...
Would you agree it's disgraceful for the UN to be?
I'll look at what they've done. We certainly would not do that.
What they've done is flown the flag at half-staff. Is that disgraceful?
We wouldn't do that, and we would certainly find that...
And I would note that's the absence of American leadership. All right, let's shift. The Washington Post on May 11th wrote an article. I'm going to read the opening paragraph. The Biden administration, working urgently to stave off a full-scale Israeli invasion of Rafah, is offering Israel valuable assistance in an effort to persuade it to hold back, including sensitive intelligence to help the Israeli military pinpoint the location of Hamas leaders and find the group's hidden tunnels, according to 4 people familiar with the U.S. offers. Is that paragraph accurate?
Exactly the opposite. First of all, no one has done more to defend Israel than Joe Biden.
Is that paragraph accurate?
Let me finish, if I may, please. He was there right after.
I'm not interested in a campaign speech. I have limited time. Is the paragraph in the Washington Post accurate?
As you read it, no. To the contrary, we're providing everything we possibly can to Israel to help them find.
So the 4 sources that briefed the Post, and by the way, briefed multiple other media outlets, they were lying?
Absolutely.
So, all right, so that, did the administration offer to provide the locations of senior Hamas leaders to Israel if they didn't invade Rafah?
That's, again, totally misleading and wrong. Here's what we've said, and here's what we're doing. We have said that there is a better way to deal with the challenge that...
I'm not interested in the speech.
If you don't want to hear my answer...
Did you offer the location of senior Hamas officials if they didn't invade Rafah? That's a yes or no.
If we had the locations, of course we'd provide them, irrespective.
So this statement, you're saying the Post got it totally wrong, it is utterly false, and anyone who said to the contrary was lying and perjuring themselves if they were under oath.
That statement is incorrect. We have done and will continue to do everything we can to, if we can do it, develop the information and share the information. I wish we had it.